The chalk trembled in Professor Victor Harlan's hand as he stared at the equation that had consumed 30 years of his life. With a bitter laugh, he hurled it against the board, the white fragment shattering like his dreams. "Impossible!" he spat, storming from the lecture hall. But in the shadows, a janitor's mop stopped moving. Elena Rivers approached the abandoned equation, her forgotten genius awakening after years of silence. What happened next would shake the foundations of mathematics forever. Stay with me until the end of this incredible true story, and comment your city below. I'd love to see how far this tale reaches. Part 1. The Forgotten Janitor. The fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song through the empty corridors of Brylock University, casting harsh shadows that danced with each flicker. It was past midnight, that sacred hour when the academic world surrendered its halls to those deemed invisible, the night staff who swept away the remnants of brilliant minds at work. Among them moved Elena Rivers, pushing her cleaning cart with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected the art of being unseen. At 34, Elena possessed the kind of beauty that life had worn down to something more subtle, sharp cheekbones that caught the light, just so dark eyes that held depths most never bothered to explore, and hands that moved with a grace that seemed at odds with the industrial cleaning gloves she wore. Those hands had once held different tools, fine point pens, advanced calculators, the weight of academic promise. Now they gripped mop handles and spray bottles. The alchemy of her former life reduced to the simple chemistry of commercial cleaning products. The mathematics building stood like a monument to everything she had lost and everything she could never quite forget. Its walls held the echo of a different Elena, 18 years old, standing at these very boards, solving differential equations with an elegance that made professors stop mid-stride in the hallways. They had called her a prodigy, then whispered about her potential in faculty meetings, fought over who would supervise her thesis. That girl felt like a ghost, now haunting these halls alongside the woman who cleaned them. Another late night, Elena. The voice startled her from her reverie. Marcus, the security guard, leaned against the doorframe of room 314, his kind face creased with concern. He was one of the few who bothered to learn her name, to see past the uniform to the person beneath. "You know me, Marcus?" she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "These floors don't clean themselves." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." He gestured toward the lecture hall behind him. "You spend more time in there than anywhere else, always lingering by those boards." Elena's hands stilled on her cart. "Just thorough, that's all." Marcus studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "My daughter's taking calculus, struggling something fierce. Don't suppose you'd know anyone who could help? I could pay a little for tutoring." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with kindness and assumption. How could she explain that once upon a time she could have taught that class, that calculus had been child's play to her back when the world was full of infinite possibilities instead of infinite bills? "I'll ask around," she said quietly, already knowing she wouldn't. Marcus nodded, understanding more than she'd said. "Take care of yourself, Elena. These halls, they're just buildings. Don't let them haunt you." But they did haunt her. Every equation left on every board was a siren song she couldn't quite ignore. As Marcus's footsteps faded down the corridor, Elena found herself drawn once again to room 314, Advanced Mathematics, the temple where Professor Victor Harlan held court. She'd watched him from the shadows for 3 years now, this man who commanded the respect of the entire mathematical community. Professor Harlan was everything academia valued: published, tenured, connected. His silver hair was always perfectly styled, his suits impeccable, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never doubted his own brilliance. Students hung on his every word, and younger faculty members scrambled for his approval like disciples seeking benediction. Tonight, something was different. Through the narrow window in the door, Elena could see the remnants of what must have been an intense session. The board was covered in his characteristic aggressive scrawl equations spreading across the black surface like a disease. But there in the center, circled multiple times in different colors of chalk, was something that made her breath catch. The Hildebrandt Conjecture. She knew it, immediately recognized it, like one might recognize an old lover's handwriting. It was one of the 7 Millennium Prize problems, a mathematical Mount Everest, that had claimed the intellectual lives of countless mathematicians. $1 million prize awaited anyone who could prove it, but more than money, it offered immortality, a place in history, alongside Euler, Gauss, and Ramanujan. Elena pushed open the door, her cleaning supplies forgotten. The room still held the energy of Harlan's frustration. Eraser dust heavy in the air, chalk fragments scattered on the floor like casualties of war. She could read the story and the equations, his attempted approach, the dead ends, the circular logic that led nowhere. He'd been trying to force it to bludgeon the problem into submission with conventional methods. Her fingers found a piece of chalk almost without conscious thought. It felt familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. The weight of it, the texture, the way it wanted to move across the board, it all came flooding back. "No," she whispered to herself. "Not anymore." But her eyes wouldn't leave the equation. She could see it, not the solution, not yet, but the shape of where Harlan had gone wrong. He was thinking about it linearly, trying to build a bridge from A to B, when what the problem needed was a spiral staircase, something that folded back on itself, that used its own structure as proof. The chalk moved to the board before she could stop herself. The first line came tentatively, her hand shaking slightly. But as the mathematics began to flow, 16 years of suppressed genius erupted like water breaking through a dam. She wasn't thinking anymore. Wasn't Elena the janitor? Or Elena the dropout? Or Elena the disappointment? She was pure mathematical thought, existing in that sublime space where numbers and logic and beauty converged. She started with a transform, something elegant that Harlan had overlooked, or perhaps never known to look for. The Hildebrandt Conjecture dealt with prime number distribution in complex polynomial fields, but everyone always approached it through number theory alone. Elena saw it differently. She saw it as a dance, a pattern that revealed itself only when you stopped trying to lead. Her hand moved faster now, covering the board with symbols that seemed to breathe with life. She introduced elements from topology, making connections that shouldn't exist but somehow did. Each line built on the last, creating a framework that was both incredibly complex and startlingly simple. It was like watching a master musician improvise each note, inevitable in retrospect, but impossible to predict. Time ceased to exist. There was only the chalk, the board, and the beautiful, terrible problem that had consumed so many brilliant minds. Elena lost herself in it, forgot about her cart in the hallway, forgot about the cameras that watched every room, forgot about everything except the pure joy of mathematical discovery. She was building something extraordinary, something that would have made her professors weep with pride. The approach was unconventional, almost reckless in its creativity, but it worked. God help her, it actually worked. She could see the end, now could feel the solution crystallizing like ice forming on water. Just a few more steps, a few more connections. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice shattered her concentration like a brick through glass. Professor Harlan stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. He looked disheveled, his usually perfect hair mussed, his tie loosened. The smell of whiskey preceded him into the room. Elena's hand froze mid-equation. The chalk fell from nerveless fingers, breaking on the floor with a sound like tiny bones snapping. "I asked you a question," Harlan snarled, advancing into the room. What gives you the right to touch my work? I'm sorry, Elena stammered, the mathematical confidence evaporating, leaving only the janitor behind. I was just cleaning and I saw… You saw nothing. He moved to the board, his eyes scanning her additions. For a moment, his expression shifted surprise, perhaps even recognition of what she'd done. But it was quickly replaced by something darker. This is vandalism. Destruction of academic property. Professor Harlan, please, I was just… Just what? Playing at being a mathematician, pretending you understand concepts that take decades to grasp. He grabbed an eraser, his movements sharp with anger. People like you think you can just waltz in here, scribble some nonsense on a board, and solve one of the great mathematical mysteries. Elena watched in horror as he began erasing her work, each swipe destroying hours of inspiration. Please don't. Don't what? Don't erase this garbage. This is my research, my classroom, my life's work. The eraser moved faster, more violently, as if he were erasing not just chalk, but the very idea that someone like Elena could contribute anything meaningful. You're a janitor. You clean. You don't think, you don't create, you don't matter in this world. The words hit her like physical blows, each one carefully aimed at wounds that had never quite healed. She wanted to tell him he was wrong. Wanted to explain who she had been, what she could have been. But the words wouldn't come. They never did not when it mattered. If I catch you in here again, doing anything other than your job, I'll have you fired. Do you understand me? Elena nodded, unable to trust her voice. Get out. She fled, leaving her cart behind, leaving pieces of her heart on that freshly erased board. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, each one taking her further from the mathematics that had momentarily made her feel alive again. Behind her, Professor Harlan stared at the board, now black and empty, except for the ghost images of equations that seemed to shimmer in the chalk dust. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, scrolling through the photos he'd managed to take before his anger had overtaken his curiosity. Because in those brief moments before rage had clouded his judgment, he'd seen something in those equations. Something that made his chest tight, with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't possible. A janitor couldn't have written what he'd seen. The approach was too sophisticated, too innovative, too brilliant. He deleted the photos with sharp, angry jabs at his screen. Then he picked up his own chalk and tried to recreate what he'd seen, what his mind had photographed, even as he'd erased it. But the magic was gone, the inspiration fled. The equations that formed under his hand were pale imitations, shadows of shadows. Alone in his classroom, Professor Victor Harlan faced his board and his limitations, and felt something cold settle in his chest. Meanwhile, Elena sat in the women's bathroom door-locked notebook balanced on her knees. Her hands shook as she wrote, trying to capture what she'd discovered before it faded like a dream upon waking. The equations flowed onto the page, cramped and urgent, racing against forgetting. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the notebook was filled with mathematics that would change everything if anyone ever saw it. But who would look at a janitor's scribblings? Who would believe that someone who mopped floors could touch the face of mathematical truth? The bathroom mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized, flushed with the fever of discovery, eyes bright with unshed tears, looking more alive than she had in years. For those precious minutes at the board, she had been herself again. Not the Elena who had dropped out to care for her dying mother, not the Elena who worked 3 jobs to pay off medical debt, not the Elena who had watched her dreams die slow, painful deaths. She had been Elena, the mathematician Elena, the prodigy Elena, the girl who was going to change the world. Stupid, she whispered to her reflection. So stupid. She should have known better, should have remembered her place, The Hildebrandt Conjecture wasn't for people like her anymore. It belonged to the Professor Harlans of the world, the ones with titles and offices, and the luxury of time to think. Her phone buzzed a text from her second job, confirming her shift at the diner started at 5 a.m. 3 hours from now, she would go from these hallowed halls of learning to serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs, the mathematical breakthrough in her notebook as useful as a lottery ticket for a drawing that had already passed. But she couldn't quite let it go. As she gathered her things, preparing to finish her shift and pretend nothing had happened, Elena made a decision. She would complete the proof. Not for publication, not for glory, not for the $1 million prize she desperately needed, but would never see. She would complete it for herself to prove that the girl who had once been wasn't entirely dead. In her pocket, the notebook felt heavier than it should, weighted with possibilities that would never be realized. She didn't know that 3 floors up, a security camera had captured everything. She didn't know but Dr. Clara Brooks, unable to sleep, and reviewing security footage for a suspected cheating incident, would stumble upon the recording in less than 6 hours. She didn't know that she had just lit a fuse that would explode through the mathematical community like wildfire. All Elena knew was that she had touched something transcendent and been slapped back down to earth. It was a familiar feeling, one she should have been used to by now. But as she pushed her cart down the hallway, resuming her invisible existence, the equations continued to dance in her mind, refusing to be silenced. The next few nights passed in a blur of careful avoidance. Elena changed her routine, cleaning the mathematics building earlier, when professors were still in their offices, and she could hear the rumble of their voices through closed doors. She stayed away from room 314, though its pull was almost magnetic. Professor Harlan's schedule was etched in her mind now. Tuesdays and Thursdays until 11 Mondays, and Wednesdays until 9 Fridays, he left early for what she'd heard graduate students call his liquid lunch that lasted until dinner. She worked on the proof in stolen moments during breaks at the diner, on the bus, between jobs in the 30 minutes before exhaustion claimed her each night. The notebook filled with mathematics that grew more elegant with each iteration. She was close, so close she could taste it. The solution had a flavor now metallic and bright, like touching a battery to your tongue. It was a Thursday when everything changed. Elena was cleaning the philosophy department 3 buildings away from mathematics when her phone rang. Marcus, the security guard. "Elena, you need to come to the main building, now." "My shift doesn't." "Now, Elena, please." The walk felt like a funeral march. They'd found out. Somehow they'd found out about her touching the board, and she was going to be fired. No references, no unemployment, no way to make rent or buy groceries or keep the lights on. Her mind was already calculating how many meals she could skip, which bills could be paid late, whether her car would last long enough to live in it if necessary. The main building's conference room was full of people. Professor Harlan sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Dr. Clara Brooks, the young topology professor Elena had always admired from afar, sat to his left. The department chair, Dr. Morrison, looked uncomfortable. Marcus stood by the door, and when Elena entered, he gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Sit," Dr. Morrison said, gesturing to a chair that felt miles away from everyone else. Elena sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. "Ms. Rivers," Dr. Morrison began, then paused, seeming to search for words. "We've had an unusual situation arise." Dr. Brooks leaned forward, her eyes bright with something Elena couldn't identify. "3 nights ago, you were in Professor Harlan's classroom." It wasn't a question, but Elena nodded anyway. "You wrote something on the board." Another nod. "Do you know what you wrote?" Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. That's not what I asked." Dr. Brooks pulled out a tablet, swiping to bring up an image. It was a screenshot from security footage, grainy but clear enough to show Elena at the board, her hand moving with confident strokes. "Do you know what you wrote?" Elena looked at Professor Harlan, expecting rage, but his face was carefully neutral. I was trying to solve something. The Hildebrandt Conjecture. Yes. "Ms. Rivers," Dr. Morrison interjected, "where did you study mathematics?" The question she'd been dreading. I was here, at Brylock, 16 years ago." The room went very still. "You were a student here," Dr. Brooks asked, her voice gentle. "For 2 years, I had to leave. Personal reasons." "What was your name then?" Dr. Morrison was already pulling up something on his laptop. "Elena Vasquez. Rivers is my married name. Was my ex-husband's." She stopped, embarrassed at the unnecessary detail. Dr. Morrison's fingers stopped moving. He looked up at her, then at his screen, then back at her. "Elena Vasquez. The Elena Vasquez you won the Putnam competition. Twice." The Putnam, the most prestigious mathematics competition for undergraduates in North America. She had been the first person from Brylock to ever place in the top 5, let alone win. It felt like remembering someone else's life. "That was a long time ago," Elena said quietly. "Why didn't you come back?" Dr. Brooks asked. "After your personal situation resolved." How could she explain that by the time her mother had died, she was drowning in debt, that she'd married Terry because he'd promised to help, only to discover his help came with fists and cruel words, that by the time she'd escaped, that she was 30 and felt 1,000 years old, that mathematics had become associated with everything she'd lost, and it hurt too much to even think about equations without remembering, her mother asking if she'd amount to anything from her hospital bed. "Life," she said simply. "Life happened." Professor Harlan finally spoke, his voice tight. "The work you did on my board, can you reproduce it?" Elena looked at him directly for the first time. "I've been continuing it, in my own time." "Show me." Her hands trembled as she pulled the notebook from her bag. It was a cheap thing bought at the dollar store, its pages already starting to yellow. She'd been transcribing it carefully into a better notebook, but that was at home and this was what she had. Dr. Brooks took it, her eyes widening as she flipped through pages. "This is... Professor Harlan, you need to see this." She slid the notebook across the table. Professor Harlan picked it up like it might bite his eyes, scanning the cramped handwriting, the equations that spilled into margins and wrapped around pages. His face went through a series of expressions, disbelief, recognition, something that might have been awe, and finally settling on anger. "This is derivative," he said flatly. "She must have seen my work, copied it. Victor." Dr. Morrison's voice carried a warning. "We all saw the security footage. She developed this approach independently. In fact, if we're being honest, it goes considerably beyond anything you've published on the subject." The accusation hung in the air. Professor Harlan's face flushed red. "You're suggesting that a janitor, a former student, a Putnam winner," Dr. Brooks corrected. "And yes, that's exactly what we're suggesting. This is insane. She cleans toilets, and you drink whiskey in your office and haven't had an original thought in 5 years." Dr. Brooks shot back, then immediately looked horrified at her own words. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena found her voice small but steady. "I don't want trouble. When I saw the problem, I couldn't help myself. I'll stop. I won't go near the mathematics building again. Please, I need this job." "Ms. Rivers," Dr. Morrison said slowly, What you've written here, if it's correct, and Dr. Brooks seems to think it is, it's a significant step toward solving the Hildebrandt Conjecture, possibly the complete solution. It's not complete, Elena said automatically. There's a gap in the third section. I haven't figured out how to bridge it yet. But I think if you apply a modified version of the Yamamoto theorem. She stopped, realizing everyone was staring at her. For a moment, she'd forgotten to be the janitor, and the mathematician had spoken instead. How long would you need, Dr. Brooks asked, to bridge the gap? I don't know. A few weeks maybe if I had time to really focus. But I don't. I work 3 jobs. I get maybe an hour a day to think about it. What if we gave you time? Professor Harlan stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're not seriously considering. Sit down, Victor, Dr. Morrison said quietly. Ms. Rivers, what Dr. Brooks is suggesting is that the department could perhaps arrange something. A research position, perhaps, temporary to allow you to complete this work. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. I don't have a degree. I never finished. That can be addressed, Dr. Morrison said. If the work is sound, and I believe it is, we could arrange for you to complete your degree, retroactively credit your research. No, Professor Harlan's voice was ice. Absolutely not. This woman is a janitor. She walked away from mathematics. We don't just hand out positions because someone had a lucky insight. Lucky. Dr. Brooks stood now too, facing him across the table. Victor, I've been reviewing her work for the past 3 hours. This isn't luck. This is genius. The kind we see once in a generation. Then where has she been for 16 years? Surviving, Elena said quietly, and something in her voice made everyone turn to look at her. I've been surviving, Professor Harlan. Not all of us have the luxury of spending our lives thinking about abstract problems. Some of us have to worry about keeping the lights on. She stood suddenly exhausted. Thank you for not firing me. I'll stay away from the mathematics building. May I go? I have another shift in 2 hours. Ms. Rivers, Elena, please, Dr. Brooks said. Don't go, not yet. But Elena was already at the door. The notebook, you can keep it. Maybe it'll help someone who belongs here. She left before anyone could respond, before the tears she'd been holding back could fall. Behind her, she heard raised voices, Dr. Brooks and Professor Harlan arguing, Dr. Morrison trying to mediate. But it all felt very far away, like sounds from another world. Marcus caught up with her in the parking lot. Elena, wait. She stopped but didn't turn around. I'm fine, Marcus. No, you're not. And you shouldn't be. He moved to stand in front of her, his kind face creased with concern. I saw the whole recording, you know. What you did in there, it was beautiful. I don't understand a lick of it, but I know beauty when I see it. Beauty doesn't pay rent. No, but it matters. Don't let them make you think it doesn't. He pressed something into her hand, a business card. My nephew, he's a lawyer, specializes in intellectual property. Just in case. Elena looked at the card, then at Marcus. In case of what? In case they try to steal it. Your work. I've been here 30 years, Elena. I've seen how this place operates. That Professor Harlan, he's already thinking about how to claim it as his own. He can have it. No. Marcus's voice was firm. No, he can't. That work is yours. That genius is yours. Don't you dare let them take it from you, not again. Elena drove home in her rattling Honda, the lawyer's card on the dashboard, her mind churning. The apartment was dark when she arrived. She'd forgotten to pay the electric bill, and they'd shut it off yesterday. She lit a candle, sat at her kitchen table, and pulled out her good notebook, the one she'd been saving for something important. By candlelight, she began to write. Not mathematics this time, but a letter. To Dr. Brooks, to Dr. Morrison, to anyone who might listen. She explained her approach to the Hildebrandt Conjecture, detailed every step, every insight, every moment of inspiration. She wrote about the gap in the proof and 3 possible approaches to bridge it. She wrote until her hand cramped and the candle burned low. Then she wrote another letter, this one to the Clay Mathematics Institute, which offered the $1 million prize for solving the conjecture. She included everything: her work, her history, her current situation. She didn't expect a response, but she needed someone somewhere to know that Elena Rivers, née Vasquez Janitor, and failed prodigy, had touched the edge of mathematical immortality. She sealed both letters, addressed them carefully, and used her last stamps to send them. Then she lay down on her mattress on the floor and stared at the ceiling, where water stains formed patterns that looked almost like equations if you squinted just right. Tomorrow she would go back to being invisible. She would clean floors and serve coffee and pretend that her mind wasn't constantly working on the problem that had consumed the greatest mathematical minds of the generation. She would survive as she always had. But tonight, in the darkness of her apartment, Elena allowed herself to dream of a different world, one where genius was recognized regardless of its source, where a janitor's insights were as valued as a professor's, where the ability to see beauty in mathematics was worth more than the ability to navigate academic politics. It was a fantasy she knew. But then again, so was the idea that someone like her could solve the Hildebrandt Conjecture. And yet, in her notebook in careful handwriting that would soon be photographed and shared and debated around the world, she had done exactly that. Almost. The gap remained taunting her, a bridge too far for someone working by candlelight after 18-hour days. But Elena had built her life on bridging impossible gaps. What was woman om torso? As she drifted toward sleep, her mind was already working, approaching the problem from new angles, testing, discarding, rebuilding. Somewhere in the city, Dr. Clara Brooks sat in her office, Elena's notebook open before her, tears streaming down her face at the elegance of what she was reading. Professor Harlan paced his apartment, whiskey in hand, trying to convince himself that what he'd seen was fraud, even as he knew it wasn't. Dr. Morrison composed emails to colleagues at other universities, carefully feeling out who might be interested in a very unusual candidate for a very unusual position. And in a small apartment with no electricity, a genius disguised as a janitor solved one of mathematics' greatest mysteries in her dreams, unaware that she was about to become the center of a storm that would reshape not just her life, but the very foundations of who gets to claim ownership of brilliance. The chalk had been cast. Now all that remained was to see where it would land. The morning after sending her letters, Elena woke to 17 missed calls. Her ancient flip phone, held together with duct tape and prayer, buzzed insistently on the floor beside her mattress. She ignored it, pulling on her diner uniform in the pre-dawn darkness, using her phone's weak light to navigate the powerless apartment. Whatever crisis awaited in those calls would have to wait. The breakfast rush at Mel's diner didn't care about mathematical proofs or academic politics. The diner sat on Route 47, a greasy beacon for truckers and shift workers, its neon sign flickering between Mel's and Miez's depending on the weather. Elena had worked there for 3 years, long enough that the regulars knew her name, and her coffee pour long enough that she could take orders while her mind worked through mathematical problems, long enough that the burns on her arms from the coffee pots had become a constellation of small circular scars. "You're late," Mel grunted as she pushed through the back door. He stood at the grill, his massive frame draped in a grease-stained apron, flipping eggs with the precision of a surgeon. 3 minutes? Elena countered, tying her apron. 3 minutes is 3 minutes. Table 6 has been waiting. She grabbed the coffee pot and moved into the dining room, where the familiar morning crowd hunched over their meals. Table 6 held Big Jim, a long-haul trucker, whose stomach preceded him by a good 6 inches, and his daughter Katie, who was studying for her GED between her father's runs. "Morning, Elena," Katie said, looking up from her math workbook. "Can you check this when you get a chance? The quadratic formula is kicking my ass." Elena glanced at the problem while pouring coffee. "You're substituting wrong. Remember b squared minus 4ac, not b minus 4ac squared. I'll write it out for you on my break." "You're too smart to be pouring coffee." Big Jim said the same thing he said every week. "Smart doesn't pay the bills." Elena replied the same response she always gave. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She ignored it, moving through her tables with practiced efficiency. But as the morning wore on, the calls became impossible to ignore. Different numbers, some local, some with area codes she didn't recognize. Finally, during a lull, she stepped into the alley behind the diner and called her voicemail. The first message made her blood run cold. "Ms. Rivers, this is Dr. Morrison. We need to speak immediately. There's been a development with your work." The second was from Dr. Brooks, her voice tight with excitement. "Elena, please call me. Something incredible has happened." The third was from a number she didn't recognize, a crisp British accent cutting through the static. "Ms. Rivers, this is Dr. James Whitmore from the Clay Mathematics Institute. We received your letter this morning. We need to discuss your proof immediately." Elena's hands shook as she listened to message after message. Journalists from Scientific American Nature, the New York Times, professors from MIT, Stanford, Cambridge. They all wanted to talk about her proof, about the work she'd sent into the void, expecting nothing back. "Elena," Mel's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Order up." She shoved the phone back in her pocket and returned to work, but her mind was reeling. How had word spread so quickly? She'd only mailed the letters yesterday. The answer came 2 hours later, when Dr. Brooks herself walked into the diner, looking utterly out of place in her tailored blazer among the vinyl booths and checkered floors. Every head turned to watch the young professor navigate to the counter where Elena was refilling ketchup bottles. "We need to talk," Clara said, without preamble. "I'm working. I'll wait." And she did, ordering coffee and a piece of pie she didn't touch, sitting at the counter for 3 hours until Elena's shift ended. Elena could feel her presence like a weight, making her hands clumsy, causing her to mix up orders and spill coffee. The other waitresses whispered and stared, sensing drama they couldn't quite identify. Finally, at 2 o'clock, Elena hung up her apron and joined Clara at a back booth, as far from curious ears as possible. "What did you do?" Elena asked. Clara pulled out her laptop, turning it so Elena could see the screen. It was a mathematics forum, one of the serious ones where verified academics discussed research. The top post, with over 10,000 views in 12 hours, was titled, "Unknown Genius Solves Hildebrandt Janitor Shows Up Academic Elite." "I didn't give them your name," Clara said quickly. "I posted the work anonymously. Just the mathematics, nothing personal." But Elena, the response, "I've never seen anything like it." Elena scrolled through the comments, her stomach churning. The mathematics community was in uproar. Some called it the most elegant approach they'd ever seen. Others demanded to know the author's credentials. A few dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, though their objections grew weaker as more experts weighed in, confirming the work's validity. "They're calling you Ghost Chalk," Clara said, a small smile playing at her lips. Someone enhanced the security footage, just the hands and the board, nothing identifying, and posted it. "The way you write, the way the mathematics flows from your hand, it's mesmerizing. You've gone viral in the math world." "This is a disaster," Elena whispered. "I just wanted to solve it for myself. I didn't want..." Fame, recognition, the $1 million prize you desperately need. Clara leaned forward, her eyes intense. Elena, I've spent the last 24 hours going through your proof with a team of the best minds I know. The gap you mentioned, we think we can bridge it. With your approach as the foundation, we're maybe days away from a complete solution. Elena's voice hardened. So now it's a team effort. No. Clara's response was immediate and firm. No, this is yours. Your name goes first on any paper. Your work, your credit. But Elena, you need support. You need resources. You need time to work without worrying about making rent. What I need is for people to leave me alone. That's not going to happen. Not anymore. Clara turned the laptop back toward herself and pulled up another page. Professor Harlan held a press conference this morning. The video showed Harlan at a podium, every silver hair in place, his voice resonating with authority as he spoke to a room full of reporters. The work being attributed to an unknown source was developed in my classroom using my foundational research. While I appreciate the enthusiasm of whoever built upon my initial framework, it's important to note that the core insights came from my 30 years of work on this problem. Elena felt something cold and sharp twist in her chest. He's stealing it. He's trying to. But here's the thing, I have the complete security footage. Not just your hands, but everything. You arriving with your cleaning cart, the timestamp showing Harlan had left hours earlier, you developing the approach from scratch. And more importantly, I have this. She pulled out a folder thick with papers. I did some digging. Every paper Harlan has published on Hildebrandt in the last 5 years, I can trace the core insights back to work that appeared on boards you cleaned. Never exact copies, always just different enough, but the patterns are there. He's been mining ideas from students and janitors for years, claiming them as his own. Elena stared at the papers, seeing her own mathematical handwriting echoed in published journals under Harlan's name. Not her work exactly, but shadows of it, ideas she'd jotted on boards while cleaning, thinking no one would notice or care. You knew, Elena said. You knew what I was doing. Clara nodded. I suspected. I have insomnia, spend a lot of late nights in the building. I'd see boards that were supposed to be cleaned with new work on them, always in the same handwriting. Beautiful work. I started photographing them before they disappeared. I never knew who was writing them until 3 nights ago. Why didn't you say anything? What would I say? Hey, mysterious mathematician, please identify yourself so we can properly credit your janitorial equations. Clara's smile was rueful. I tried to catch you once, stayed hidden in a classroom, but you never came when anyone was watching. It was like you had a sixth sense for avoiding observation. Elena laughed bitterly. 16 years of practice being invisible. Well, you're not invisible anymore. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Before Elena could answer, her phone rang. The British number again. This time she answered. Ms. Rivers, James Whitmore here. I'm in Boston, flew in this morning. Can we meet today? I'm working. I have another job in an hour. Ms. Rivers, I'm prepared to offer you an advance on the prize money. Enough to quit your jobs and focus on completing the proof. Would $100,000 be sufficient to start? Elena's mouth went dry. She looked at Clara, who was watching with raised eyebrows, able to hear Whitmore's crisp voice in the quiet diner. I need to think. Of course. But Ms. Rivers, I should warn you, there are others who will try to claim this work. The mathematics community can be territorial. You need protection, legal and academic. We can provide both, but time is of the essence. He gave her his hotel information and hung up. Elena sat in the vinyl booth, staring at her phone, feeling the world shifting beneath her feet like tectonic plates realigning. 100,000, Clara said softly. That would change everything. Nothing changes. Elena stood abruptly. I have to get to my second job. Elena. No. This morning I was a janitor who couldn't pay her electric bill. Now suddenly everyone wants to throw money at me for what, some chalk on a board. She grabbed her bag, hands shaking. I need time to think. Clara reached out, catching her wrist gently. Take all the time you need. But Elena, this is real. Your genius is real. Don't let fear or Harlan or anyone else take this from you. Elena pulled away and left, but Clara's words followed her as she drove to her evening shift at the gas station. The convenience store job was mindless scanning items, making change, occasionally mopping up spills. It gave her time to think, to process the hurricane she'd somehow created. At 9 p.m., a black town car pulled up to the pumps. No one emerged to pump gas. Instead, after a moment, Professor Harlan stepped out of the back seat and walked into the store. He looked different here under the harsh fluorescence, away from his kingdom of chalk and theory. Smaller, somehow more human. He approached the counter where Elena stood frozen, her hand hovering over the panic button they kept for robberies. Ms. Rivers, he placed a folder on the counter. We need to discuss terms. We have nothing to discuss. On the contrary, your work, while impressive, builds directly on my research. Any publication would need to acknowledge that. I'm prepared to be generous co-authorship with your name first. 60% of any prize money. It's more than fair. Elena looked at him, this man who had erased her work, who had called her nothing, who had stolen ideas from countless others. No. No. His eyebrows rose. Ms. Rivers, you're a janitor. You have no degree, no standing in the academic community. Without my support, your proof is just scribblings from someone who cleans toilets. With it, you're a respected mathematician. I'd rather stay a janitor. His face darkened. You're making a mistake. I have connections, influence. I can make sure your work never sees publication, or... He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. I can make you famous. Your choice. My choice is for you to leave. Think carefully, Miss Rivers. You have a notebook full of mathematics and no way to verify its authenticity. I have 30 years of published work on this exact problem. Who do you think they'll believe? He left without waiting for an answer, the folder still on the counter. Elena opened it after he was gone. Inside was a contract, pages of legal language that essentially signed over all rights to her work in exchange for a small percentage and the privilege of being acknowledged as a research assistant. She fed it into the shredder, watching the strips of paper fall like mathematical snow. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number, but she recognized the voice immediately, Marcus, the security guard, though he was calling from a different phone. Elena, you need to know something. Harlan's in the security office right now trying to get the footage from 3 nights ago deleted. He's claiming it's a privacy violation, threatening lawsuits. Can he do that? Not if someone already made copies. There was a smile in Marcus's voice. Which someone did. Multiple someones, actually. That Dr. Brooks is smarter than she looks. She had me make copies before anyone knew to look for them. Elena sagged against the counter, relief washing over her. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet. Harlan's not going to give up easy. Man like that, his whole identity is wrapped up in being the smartest person in the room. You've shown him up and in public. He'll fight dirty. After ending the call, Elena stood alone in the empty store, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, and she could see her reflection in the glass, tired, worn, but with something new in her eyes. Determination, maybe, or just the exhaustion of someone who had nothing left to lose. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number, just a link. She clicked it against her better judgment and found herself looking at a YouTube video titled, "Ghost Chalk, the Mathematician Who Came From Nowhere." The video, posted just hours ago, already had 50,000 views. It showed the enhanced security footage Clara had mentioned, just Elena's hands, and the board her face carefully kept out of frame. But watching herself work, seeing the mathematics flow from her fingers like water, Elena understood why people were mesmerized. There was something beautiful about it, something pure. The comments ranged from awe to skepticism to demands for the mathematician's identity. At midnight, she closed the store and drove home to her dark apartment. By candlelight, she opened her good notebook and continued working on the proof. The gap was still there, taunting her, but she could feel the solution hovering just beyond reach. Her hand moved across the page equations, spilling out in elegant chains of logic. A knock at the door interrupted her. Elena froze. No one visited her, especially not at 1 in the morning. Another knock, more insistent. "Ms. Rivers, it's Dr. Whitmore. I apologize for the hour, but this couldn't wait." Elena crept to the door, peering through the peephole. A distinguished older man stood in the hallway, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she made in a month. Beside him stood a woman in a severe black dress holding a briefcase. "Please," Whitmore said to the door. "5 minutes. It's about protecting your work." Elena opened the door, but didn't invite them in. "It's 1 in the morning. Yes, and by tomorrow morning, 3 different parties will claim to have solved the Hildebrandt Conjecture using your approach. We need to establish priority. Tonight." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Sarah Winter's intellectual property attorney. She's the best in the field." "I can't afford—" "The Clay Institute will cover all legal fees," Whitmore interrupted. "Ms. Rivers, your work is extraordinary. But without proper documentation, without establishing clear ownership, it will be stolen. Not might be, will be." Elena looked at them, these strangers offering help she hadn't asked for protection. She wasn't sure she wanted. But then she thought about Harlan's smug face, about all the years she'd spent invisible, about Katie at the diner struggling with quadratic equations, while never knowing that her waitress had once solved problems that would make her textbook authors weep. "5 minutes," she said, stepping aside. They entered her apartment, and if they were shocked by the absence of electricity or furniture, they didn't show it. Sarah Winters immediately began setting up documents by phone light, while Whitmore examined Elena's notebooks with a small flashlight, his expression growing more amazed with each page. "This is— Ms. Rivers, do you understand what you've done here? This approach, it doesn't just solve Hildebrandt. It opens up entirely new avenues of mathematical exploration. This could revolutionize how we think about prime distribution." "It's not complete," Elena said for what felt like the 100th time. "No, but it's close. Remarkably close." He looked up at her, and in the candlelight, his eyes were kind. "Ms. Rivers, I've been evaluating mathematical proofs for 30 years. I've seen brilliance, I've seen genius, but this is something else. This is the kind of breakthrough that comes along once in a generation." Sarah looked up from her documents. "We need to file everything tonight. Timestamp it, establish priority. Ms. Rivers, I need you to sign these. They don't give us any rights to your work, they simply establish you as the sole author and begin the legal process of protecting it." Elena took the pen, hesitated. "What about Professor Harlan?" "He says it's derivative of his work." Sarah smiled, and it was sharp as a blade. "Let him try to prove it. I've been reviewing his publications all day. His approach is conventional, pedestrian even. Yours is revolutionary. Any competent mathematician could see they're completely different. His claim would be like someone saying they invented the airplane because they once threw a paper plane. Elena signed the papers, each signature feeling like a step towards something irreversible. As she wrote her name for the last time, the lights suddenly flickered on. The power company had finally processed her payment 3 days late, but accepted. In the sudden brightness, her apartment looked even shabbier. Water stains on the ceiling, cracked linoleum, a single mattress on the floor. But Whitmore and Winters weren't looking at the apartment. They were looking at the wall behind Elena, where she'd taped up hundreds of pages of mathematical work, creating a vast tapestry of equations that covered every available surface. "My God," Whitmore breathed. "How long have you been working on this?" 16 years, Elena said quietly. "Not just Hildebrandt. Other problems too. It was how I stayed sane." Sarah was already photographing everything with a professional camera she'd pulled from her briefcase. "This all needs to be documented. Every page." "Why?" Elena asked. "Because in about 6 hours, when the academic world wakes up and realizes what's happening, everyone who's ever worked on similar problems is going to try to claim prior art. This proves you've been developing these approaches for years." They worked until dawn, documenting everything, creating an unassailable record of Elena's work. As the sun began to rise, painting the shabby apartment in golden light, Whitmore turned to Elena with a serious expression. "There's going to be a feeding frenzy. Media, academics, everyone wanting a piece of this story. You need to be prepared. I just want to finish the proof. Then that's what we'll make possible. The advance I mentioned, it's already been approved. The money will be in your account by noon. Take a leave from your jobs. Focus on the mathematics. We'll handle everything else." After they left, Elena sat in her now lit apartment feeling strangely empty. The phone rang constantly. She'd stopped answering. Outside, she could hear voices, and when she peered through the window, she saw news vans beginning to gather. Someone had leaked her address. She grabbed her notebooks, shoved some clothes in a bag, and slipped out the back door. She needed somewhere quiet to think, to work, to finish what she'd started. As she drove away in her battered Honda, she caught a glimpse of someone in her rearview mirror, a familiar figure with silver hair standing beside one of the news vans, speaking animatedly to a reporter. Harlan was already spinning his narrative. But Elena had something better than narrative. She had the truth written in the universal language of mathematics, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Her phone buzzed with a text from Clara. "I have a cabin in the mountains. Quiet, isolated, perfect for working. It's yours if you want it." Elena typed back with one thumb while driving, "Yes." Clara sent the address, then another message. "Harlan's claiming he's been mentoring you secretly for years. Says you were his unofficial student." Elena laughed, actually laughed at the absurdity of it. The man who had erased her work, who had called her nothing, was now trying to claim credit for creating her. But as she drove toward the mountains, toward quiet and solitude, and the chance to finish her proof, Elena realized something. It didn't matter what Harlan claimed. It didn't matter what anyone said. The mathematics would speak for itself. Truth, real truth, didn't need defending. It simply was. And in her notebooks, in her mind, in the very fiber of her being, Elena carried a truth that would soon reshape the mathematical world. She just had to survive long enough to reveal it. The sun climbed higher as she drove, burning away the morning mist, revealing the mountains ahead like a promise. Somewhere up there in the quiet, she would finish what she'd started. And then finally, Elena Rivers would step out of the shadows and into the light she'd always deserved. But first, she had a proof to complete, and a gap to bridge, and a lifetime of being invisible to overcome. The road stretched ahead, winding and uncertain, but for the first time in 16 years, Elena wasn't afraid of where it might lead. The cabin sat nestled between pine trees so tall, they seemed to scrape the belly of the sky, their branches creating a canopy that filtered sunlight into something soft and green. Elena had been there for 3 days now, 3 days of blessed silence broken only by the scratch of pencil on paper and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. The gap in her proof was closing slowly, like watching a wound heal from the inside out. She worked at a rough wooden table that Clara had left stocked with fresh notebooks, quality pens, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The electricity here was reliable, the internet deliberately disconnected. The only link to the outside world was an old landline that Elena had unplugged after the first day, tired of its insistent ringing. The mathematics consumed her in a way she hadn't allowed in years. Without the constant pressure of survival, without the need to portion out her thinking time between customers and cleaning supplies, her mind expanded like a flower finally given sunlight. The proof grew more elegant with each iteration, the gap shrinking from an insurmountable chasm to a narrow crack she could almost step across. It was the Yamamoto theorem that finally gave her the bridge, but not in the way she'd originally thought. She needed to invert it, turn it inside out, like a glove use its contradiction rather than its proof. The moment she saw it, really saw it, she actually gasped aloud, the sound echoing in the empty cabin. Her hand moved across the page with increasing speed, the mathematics flowing like water finding its course down a mountainside. Each line led inevitably to the next, a chain of logic so beautiful it made her chest ache. This was what she'd been born to do, what 16 years of struggle had never quite managed to kill. The final line of the proof wrote itself, her hand merely the conduit for something that had always existed, waiting to be discovered. She set down the pencil and stared at the pages spread before her, hardly daring to believe it was complete. The Hildebrandt Conjecture was solved. Elena stood her legs shaky from hours of sitting and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple she'd never noticed while rushing between jobs. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt peace. Not happiness exactly, that would come later maybe, but a deep settling peace, like finally putting down a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her body. The landline rang its sound jarring in the silence. She'd forgotten to keep it unplugged. After a moment's hesitation, she answered. "Elena." Clara's voice was tight with worry. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours." I unplugged the phone. I needed to focus. "You need to know what's happening. Harlan, he's filed a formal complaint with the university. He's claiming academic theft, saying you had access to his unpublished work while cleaning his office. He's got 3 other professors backing him up, saying they saw you going through papers." Elena felt the piece shatter like dropped glass. "That's a lie." "Of course it is, but he's also filed for an injunction to prevent publication of your proof until the matter is resolved. And Elena, he's called for an emergency faculty meeting tomorrow. They're going to vote on whether to support his claim." "Can they do that?" "They can do whatever they want. Academic politics is brutal, and Harlan has been building alliances for 30 years. But here's the thing, he doesn't know the proof is complete. No one does except you." Elena looked at the pages on the table, the completed proof that would change everything. "What do you think I should do? Come back, face them, present your proof to the faculty before Harlan can poison them all against you. I've already called Whitmore and Sarah Winters. They'll be there. I'm a janitor, Clara. They won't listen to me. You're a mathematician, one of the greatest living mathematicians, whether they know it or not. Make them see it." Elena hung up and began gathering her papers, organizing the proof into a presentable form. Her hands shook slightly, but her mind was clear. She'd spent 16 years running from confrontation, keeping her head down, being invisible. But mathematics wasn't about hiding. It was about truth, elegant and undeniable. She drove through the night, arriving at Brylock University as dawn was breaking. The campus was already buzzing with activity despite the early hour. News vans lined the main drive, reporters doing stand-ups with the mathematics building as backdrop. Someone had leaked the story of the emergency meeting, and the media smelled blood in the water. Elena parked in the staff lot using her janitor's pass for what might be the last time. She'd dressed carefully, not in her cleaning uniform, but not trying to pretend to be something she wasn't either. Clean jeans, a simple black sweater, her hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn while mopping these very floors. Sarah Winters met her at the entrance, immaculate despite the early hour. "They're trying to bar you from the meeting, saying you're not faculty." "I'm not." "No, but you're the subject of the discussion. I've filed an emergency motion. You have a right to defend yourself against accusations of theft." She handed Elena a folder. "Don't let them intimidate you. You have truth on your side." "Truth doesn't always win." Sarah's smile was sharp. "No, but it helps to have a very expensive lawyer." The meeting was held in the same conference room where Elena had first been confronted with the security footage. But now it was packed, every seat filled with faculty members she recognized, but had never spoken to people who had walked past her for years without seeing her. They saw her now, their faces ranging from curious to hostile to carefully neutral. Professor Harlan sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his silver hair catching the morning light. He'd dressed for battle, his best suit, his MIT class ring, prominent every inch the distinguished academic. When Elena entered, his eyes narrowed, but his smile was confident. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Morrison called the meeting to order, looking deeply uncomfortable. "We're here to discuss the claims regarding the Hildebrandt Conjecture proof and the allegations of academic misconduct." "There's no allegation," Harlan said smoothly. "It's a simple matter of fact. Ms. Rivers had access to my private office, my personal papers. The approach she's claiming as her own bears remarkable similarity to work I've been developing for years." "Then show us this work," Clara said from her seat along the wall. As junior faculty, she wasn't supposed to speak, but she did anyway. "If you've been developing this approach, surely you have notes, drafts, something dated before 3 nights ago." Harlan's jaw tightened. "My work is proprietary. I'm not required to reveal it to satisfy the curiosity of a junior professor who's clearly been compromised by personal feelings." "Personal feelings?" Clara stood. "You mean basic human decency? Respect for brilliant work, regardless of its source." "Enough," Dr. Morrison said. "Ms. Rivers, you have the floor. Please explain your position." Elena stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. She looked around the room at these people who embodied everything she'd once wanted to be, everything she'd lost. 16 years ago, she began, her voice quiet but clear. "I was a student here. Some of you might remember me, Elena Vasquez. I won the Putnam twice. I was going to change the world with mathematics." She paused, meeting eyes around the table. "Then my mother got cancer. Stage 4, terminal. I left school to care for her, thinking I'd come back. But life doesn't wait for our plans." She pulled out her notebooks, the cheap dollar store ones filled with years of work. "I never stopped doing mathematics. Even when I was cleaning your offices, serving coffee, stocking shelves, my mind was always working. These notebooks are dated. Every page, every thought, every approach that led to the solution. 16 years of work that no one saw because no one looks at the janitor." "This is very touching," Harlan interrupted, "but hardly proof of—" "I'm not finished." Elena's voice hardened. "You want to talk about theft? Professor Harlan. Let's talk about the Rowan Conjecture solution published under your name 3 years ago. I wrote the key insight on your board while cleaning. You photographed it before erasing it. The security footage from that night still exists. The room went very still. Or we could discuss the approach to Mersenne primes you presented at the Berlin conference. I worked that out on the board in room 237. You were seen entering that room the next morning an hour before your flight. She pulled out a photograph Clara had given her, time-stamped and clear. This is my work photographed by Dr. Brooks before you claimed it. These are serious accusations, Dr. Morrison said slowly. They're facts, Elena replied. But I'm not here to litigate the past. I'm here because I solved the Hildebrandt Conjecture. Completely. The gap is bridged. A murmur ran through the room. Harlan's face had gone pale. That's impossible. The gap in your approach. You mean the gap in the approach you claim is yours? Elena pulled out the final pages of her proof. Would you like to explain how to bridge it, since it's your work? Harlan's mouth opened, then closed. The room waited. Elena continued, the bridge requires inverting the Yamamoto theorem using its contradiction as a foundation rather than its proof. It's counterintuitive, which is why no one has seen it before. But it works. She began writing on the whiteboard, the mathematics flowing from her hand, with the same grace that had captivated thousands online. You start here with the assumption that the theorem fails. For the next hour, she walked them through the proof. The room was silent except for her voice and the whisper of marker on board. She could feel the shift in atmosphere as understanding dawned on face after face. These were mathematicians, whatever their politics. They recognized truth when they saw it. When she finished, the silence stretched like a held breath. Then from the back of the room, old Professor Emeritus Johnson began to clap. Slowly, others joined him first, the younger faculty, then the established professors, until even Harlan's allies were applauding. Harlan himself sat frozen, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. This is extraordinary, Dr. Morrison said. Ms. Rivers, this proof, it's not just correct, it's revolutionary. The techniques you've developed here could apply to dozens of other problems. She's a janitor, Harlan said, his voice cracking. She cleans toilets. You're going to accept this from someone who cleans toilets. I'd accept it from anyone who could produce it. Professor Johnson said, his aged voice carrying the weight of 60 years in mathematics. That's what mathematics is, Victor. It doesn't care about your title or your office or your connections. It only cares about truth. Besides, Clara added, unable to resist, she won't be cleaning toilets much longer. MIT called this morning, Harvard this afternoon. They're all interested in offering her a position. Elena felt the world spinning slightly. I haven't agreed to anything. No, but you have options now, Dr. Morrison said. Miss Rivers, Dr. Rivers, once we sort out the formalities, Brylock University would be honored to have you return. Full scholarship to complete your degree, immediate appointment to the faculty upon graduation, research funding. This is insane. Harlan stood his chair, scraping against the floor. You're all insane. She's a nobody, a nothing, a genius, Sarah Winters said from the doorway, her voice cutting through his tirade. And as of an hour ago, officially recognized by the Clay Mathematics Institute as the solver of the Hildebrandt Conjecture. The $1 million prize will be awarded pending peer review, which, given what I've just witnessed, is a formality. The room erupted. Faculty members surrounded Elena, offering congratulations, asking questions about her approach, treating her with the respect she'd craved for so long. It felt foreign now. Through the crowd, she saw Harlan gathering his papers, his face dark with humiliation. He pushed through the crowd to face her. This isn't over. I'll contest this. I'll prove you had access to my work. Professor Harlan, Elena said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. I had access to your boards. That's all. And on those boards I saw the work of dozens of students and staff whose ideas you claimed as your own. I have photographs, dates, evidence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. Walk away. Retire. Keep whatever dignity you have left, or I'll reveal everything. His face went from red to white. Without another word, he left the room, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that reporters had somehow gotten into the building, cameras and microphones everywhere. Elena found herself at the center of a storm, everyone wanting to talk to the janitor, who had solved one of mathematics' great mysteries. But she wasn't listening to the questions being shouted at her. She was thinking about her mother dead these 8 years, who had asked from her hospital bed if Elena would ever amount to anything. She was thinking about Terry, her ex-husband, who had told her she was too stupid to do anything but clean. She was thinking about every night she'd come home too tired to think, but forced herself to work on mathematics anyway, keeping the spark alive when everything else was trying to extinguish it. Ms. Rivers, a reporter shoved a microphone at her face. How does it feel to go from janitor to millionaire mathematician overnight? Elena looked at the camera, at all the cameras, at all the faces waiting for her answer. I was always a mathematician, she said. I just happened to also be a janitor. One job fed my body, the other fed my soul. Both have value. Both deserve respect. What will you do now? Another reporter asked. Elena thought about the offers pouring in, the positions at prestigious universities, the research opportunities, the complete reversal of fortune that felt too surreal to process. Then she thought about Katie at the diner struggling with quadratic equations, about Marcus, the security guard's daughter who was good at math but thought it wasn't for people like her, about all the brilliant minds cleaning offices and serving coffee and surviving instead of thriving. I'm going to teach, she said, but not just at universities. I'm going to find the hidden mathematicians, the ones working night shifts and double shifts, the ones who think genius only belongs to people with titles and degrees. I'm going to show them that mathematics doesn't care where you come from or what you do to survive. It only cares about truth. Clara appeared at her elbow, gently guiding her away from the cameras. Come on, let's get you out of here. They escaped through a service entrance Elena knew well. She'd used it countless times with her cleaning cart. Outside, the morning had given way to a brilliant afternoon, the kind of light that made everything look possible. So, Clara said, MIT or Harvard? Neither, Elena said, surprising herself with the certainty. I'll finish my degree here at Brylock, but I'm not joining the faculty. Not in the traditional sense. Then what? Elena looked back at the mathematics building, at the windows of offices she'd cleaned for 3 years, at the halls where she'd been invisible for so long. I'm going to start something new. A program for non-traditional students, for people who fell through the cracks. Mathematics for the forgotten. Clara smiled. That's going to ruffle some feathers. Good. Feathers need ruffling. They walked to Elena's battered Honda, still parked in the janitor's section of the lot. As she drove away from campus, Elena's phone rang, constantly. Job offers, interview requests, congratulations from people who hadn't spoken to her in 16 years. She ignored them all. Instead, she drove to Mel's diner, still wearing her good sweater, still processing everything that had happened. The lunch rush was in full swing, and she could see her replacement struggling with the coffee machine through the window. She walked in, and the noise stopped. Everyone stared, and the morning news had been playing her story on repeat, the janitor who solved the impossible problem. Big Jim was there with Katie, both of them looking at her with something like awe. "Heard you got famous," Mel said from behind the grill, trying to sound gruff, but failing to hide his pride. "Guess you won't be pouring coffee anymore." "No," Elena agreed. "But I was wondering if I could use the back room, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, to teach mathematics, free for anyone who wants to learn." Mel's face softened in a way she'd never seen. "Yeah, sure. Why not? Place could use some class." Katie immediately raised her hand. "Can I be your first student?" "You already are," Elena said, and for the first time in 16 years, the smile that crossed her face felt real, felt whole, felt like coming home. That night she returned to her apartment to find it transformed. The power was on, someone had paid her bill for the year. Boxes sat by the door, books, a real bed, a desk all with notes from mathematicians around the world who had been inspired by her story. But the thing that made her cry was a simple frame on top of one box containing a printed screenshot from the mathematics forum where she'd been revealed. The title had been updated, "Ghost Chalk Has a Name, Elena Rivers, Proof That Genius Lives Everywhere." She hung it on her wall right next to her notebooks, right next to the mathematical tapestry she'd created in those dark nights when hope was just another equation she couldn't quite solve. But now she had solved it. The Hildebrandt Conjecture was just mathematics. The harder proof that she mattered, that her mind had value regardless of her circumstances, that had taken 16 years to complete. Elena sat at her new desk with fresh notebooks and good pens and began working on her next problem. Not one of the Millennium Prizes this time, but something harder: how to build a bridge between the academy and the forgotten, how to democratize genius, how to ensure that the next Elena Rivers wouldn't have to wait 16 years to be seen. Outside her window, Brylock University's lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time they felt like they were shining for her. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to her apartment door, with the kind of ceremony usually reserved for state documents. The envelope bore the seal of the International Mathematical Union, and inside the words that made Elena's hands tremble: "You are cordially invited to present your proof of the Hildebrandt Conjecture at the International Congress of Mathematicians in Geneva, Switzerland." 6 weeks had passed since the confrontation at Brylock University. 6 weeks of interviews, of peer reviews of mathematicians around the world, confirming what Elena already knew: the proof was complete, elegant, and revolutionary. But this invitation was different. The ICM was mathematics' grandest stage, held only once every 4 years, where Fields medals were awarded, and careers were made or destroyed in 90-minute presentations. Elena sat at her kitchen table, now properly furnished, thanks to the advance from the Clay Institute, staring at the invitation. Her phone rang. Clara, who had become something between a friend and a protective older sister, despite being 5 years younger. "You got it, didn't you?" Clara said without preamble. "The ICM invitation." "How did you know?" "Because I'm on the organizing committee. I fought tooth and nail to get you a prime slot, opening day, main auditorium. 2,000 of the world's best mathematicians will be there." Elena's stomach churned. "I can't." "You can and you will. Elena, this is your moment. The whole world is watching." "That's what I'm afraid of." Clara's voice softened. "I know, but you've hidden long enough. It's time to step into the light." The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah Winters handled the legal aspects. There had been 3 attempts to claim partial credit for the proof, all quickly demolished by the extensive documentation they'd compiled. Whitmore from the Clay Institute became a regular visitor, helping Elena prepare for the presentation, teaching her the unspoken rules of academic performance at this level. "Don't apologize," he told her during one session. "Not for your background, Not for your approach, not for anything. You solved one of the 7 millennium problems. Own it. But ownership was a complicated thing for someone who had spent so long being owned by circumstance. Elena practiced her presentation obsessively, filling notebooks with different approaches, different ways to explain the beauty of what she'd discovered. She wanted them to see not just the solution, but the journey, the 16 years of thought that had led to that moment at the blackboard. Katie from the diner became her test audience, sitting through presentation after presentation in Mel's back room, asking questions that helped Elena refine her explanations. "I don't understand the part about inverting the theorem," Katie would say, and Elena would find a new way to explain it, using shapes and patterns instead of pure symbols. "You're going to change how mathematics is taught," Katie told her one evening. "You make it feel alive." The morning of her flight to Geneva, Elena stood in her apartment, packed and ready but unable to move. The girl who had won the Putnam twice would have been thrilled at this opportunity. But that girl hadn't spent 16 years being told she was nothing, hadn't cleaned toilets, while her mind solved impossible problems, hadn't learned that brilliance meant nothing if the world refused to see it. A knock at the door interrupted her paralysis. Marcus stood there, the security guard who had first believed in her, holding a small wrapped package. "Figured you might need this," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a piece of chalk, not ordinary chalk, but a beautiful piece of Hagoromo Full Touch, the legendary Japanese chalk that mathematicians hoarded like gold. A note was attached, "For when you show them what we always knew you could do," from all of us who worked the night shift. Elena clutched the chalk, tears threatening. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just go show those fancy professors that genius doesn't always wear a suit." The flight to Geneva felt both endless and too short. Elena had never been to Europe, had barely been out of the state in the last decade. She watched the Atlantic pass below each mile, taking her further from everything familiar and closer to a moment she'd never dared imagine. Geneva's airport was a shock of efficiency and languages she didn't recognize. The ICM had sent a car, and the driver, speaking accented English, told her about the Congress as they drove through streets that looked like something from a fairy tale. "You are the famous ghost chalk, yes," he said, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "My daughter, she is studying mathematics because of you. She says if the janitor can solve the impossible problem, then she can too." The hotel was grander than anything Elena had ever experienced, all marble and crystal, and people who looked like they belonged in such spaces. She felt out of place in her simple clothes, carrying her notebooks in a backpack that had seen better days. But at the registration desk, the clerk's eyes widened when she gave her name. "Ms. Rivers. We have been expecting you. You are in the presidential suite, compliments of the International Mathematical Union." The suite was larger than her entire apartment, with views of Lake Geneva that made her dizzy. She stood at the window watching swans glide across water that reflected the Alps and wondered how she'd traveled so far from mopping floors at Brelock University. That evening was the opening reception. Elena had bought one good dress for the occasion, black and simple, nothing like the elegant gowns worn by the other attendees. She stood at the entrance to the ballroom, watching the crowd of mathematical elite mingle with practiced ease, and nearly turned around. Elena Rivers. She turned to find an elderly Japanese man, his face kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I am Koji Yamamoto." Elena's breath caught. "The Yamamoto theorem. Your work was crucial to my proof." He smiled. "And your inversion of it was brilliant. I never saw that possibility. You have young eyes unclouded by convention." He took her arm gently. "Come. There are many people eager to meet you." What followed was a surreal parade of introductions. Fields Medal winners, department chairs from the world's greatest universities, mathematicians, whose textbooks she'd studied when she still believed in her future. They all wanted to talk to her to understand how she'd seen what they'd missed. "Your approach is so unconventional," said a professor from Cambridge. "Where did you train life?" Elena answered, finding her confidence in small increments. "When you can only think about mathematics in stolen moments, you learn to see patterns differently." But not everyone was welcoming. She overheard whispers, saw the skeptical looks, felt the resistance from those who couldn't accept that someone like her had succeeded where they had failed. "She had help," one voice muttered. "No one works in isolation and produces something like this." "I heard Harlan is coming," another said. "He's demanding time to present a rebuttal." Elena's stomach clenched. She'd thought Harlan was finished, his reputation destroyed by the revelations of his theft. But men like him didn't give up easily. That night, she barely slept, going over her presentation again and again. The chalk Marcus had given her sat on the bedside table, a talisman against fear. Tomorrow she would stand before the mathematical world and prove she belonged there. Or she would fail, and all of this would have been a beautiful dream before returning to reality. The morning came too soon. The main auditorium was a vast space that could hold 3,000 people, and every seat was filled. Elena stood backstage, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the introduction that being given by the president of the IMU. "A remarkable story of perseverance and genius, solving one of the 7 millennium problems. Please welcome Elena Rivers." The walk to the podium felt endless. The silence was complete, thousands of eyes tracking her movement. She could see faces she recognized from journal photographs, mathematical celebrities who had become mythical figures in her imagination. And there, in the third row, sat Professor Harlan, his face set in hard lines. Elena reached the podium, set down her notes with trembling hands, and looked out at the sea of faces. The microphone caught her breathing, amplified it through the space. For a moment she couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't remember why she'd thought she could do this. Then she saw them, a small group in the back wearing maintenance uniforms. Janitors, security guards, service workers who had somehow gotten day passes to attend. One of them raised a fist in silent support, and Elena found her voice. 16 years ago, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I dropped out of this world, not by choice, but by necessity. My mother was dying, and mathematics, no matter how beautiful, cannot cure cancer or pay medical bills. I became invisible, a janitor, a waitress, a gas station attendant. But I never stopped being a mathematician." She turned to the board behind her, picking up the chalk, not the Hagoromo, but a simple piece of white chalk like the one she'd first used that night in Harlan's classroom. "The Hildebrandt Conjecture asks us to find patterns in the distribution of prime numbers across complex polynomial fields. For 30 years, the approach has been to build elaborate frameworks to attack the problem with ever more complex machinery. But sometimes the most profound truths are simple. Sometimes we need to invert our assumptions." She began to write, and as the mathematics flowed onto the board, she felt the audience lean forward. This wasn't how mathematical presentations usually went. No slides, no prepared figures, just chalk and board, and the raw creation of understanding. "We begin with failure," she said, writing the Yamamoto theorem in its traditional form. "This theorem tells us what cannot be done. But what if failure is just another kind of success? What if the limitation itself is the key?" She inverted the theorem with a few swift strokes, and gasps rippled through the audience. It was so simple when you saw it, so obvious in retrospect, but it had taken 16 years of thinking differently to find it. For the next hour, she walked them through the proof, but not in the traditional way. She told stories with the mathematics created visual metaphors that made abstract concepts tangible. She drew spirals that became prime numbers, transformed equations into architectural structures that built upon themselves. "When you clean the same boards every night," she said at one point, "you see the ghost of every equation that's been written there. Layers upon layers of attempted understanding. I learned to read those ghosts to see where thoughts had died and ask why. This proof is built on 1,000 failures, none of them mine, all of them teaching me where not to look." She reached the gap that had stymied her for so long, the bridge she'd built in the cabin. This is where traditional thinking fails us. We cannot get from A to B by walking forward. We must spiral fold space itself, use the shape of the problem as the solution. The mathematics that followed was dense, complex, but she made it sing. She turned to face the audience as she wrote, maintaining eye contact, making each person feel as if she were explaining it directly to them. She saw understanding dawn on face after face, watched skepticism transform into wonder. "And here," she said, writing the final line with a flourish, "we arrive not at an answer, but at an understanding. The Hildebrandt Conjecture is true not because we can prove it, but because its truth is woven into the very fabric of mathematical reality. We just needed to learn how to see it." She set down the chalk and faced the audience. The silence stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then the auditorium erupted. The applause was thunderous, people rising to their feet in waves. She saw tears on some faces, joy on others, and even a few who looked angry at the beauty of what they'd witnessed. The service workers in the back were cheering openly, their voices carrying over the academic applause. But not everyone was standing. Professor Harlan remained seated, his face dark with rage. As the applause finally died down, he stood. "I request time to address this presentation," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in academia. The IMU president looked uncomfortable. "Professor Harlan, this isn't the appropriate—" "I have the right to academic discourse," Harlan interrupted. "There are questions about the origins of this work that must be addressed." Elena felt the old fear rising, the instinct to shrink, to disappear. But then she looked at the board behind her, covered in her mathematics, her truth, and found her strength. "Ask your questions," she said into the microphone. Harlan moved to the aisle, his presence commanding attention. "Ms. Rivers claims to have developed this approach independently. Yet she had access to my office, my private work, for 3 years. The similarity between her method and my unpublished research is too significant to be coincidence." "Then show us," Elena said. "You have the board. Show us your unpublished research." The challenge hung in the air. Harlan's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching. "My work is proprietary." "Mathematics is not proprietary," Elena interrupted. "It belongs to everyone or no one. If you developed this approach, prove it. Show us even one page, one equation, one insight that predates my work." "You were a janitor," he snarled, abandoning pretense. "You cleaned toilets. You want us to believe that someone who couldn't even finish their degree solved one of the greatest problems in mathematics." "Yes," Elena said simply, "because that's exactly what happened. And you know it, Professor Harlan. You know it because you watched the security footage before you erased my work. You saw something you couldn't understand, couldn't replicate, couldn't steal, and it terrified you." She turned to address the audience. "Professor Harlan is right about one thing. I did have access to his office, to all your offices. I saw your work, your struggles, your failures, and I learned from them. Every mathematician builds on those who came before. The difference is I acknowledge my sources. I don't steal them." "How dare you? How dare I?" Elena's voice rose for the first time. How dare I, what exist, think, solve problems that you couldn't? Spent 16 years believing I was nothing because people like you told me so. But mathematics doesn't care about your prejudice. It doesn't care about your titles or your offices or your prestigious positions. It only cares about truth. She picked up the Hagoromo chalk Marcus had given her, feeling its perfect weight. You want to see the difference between us, Professor Harlan? Watch. She turned to a clean section of board and began writing a different proof, one she'd been working on for years, but never shared. It was the twin prime conjecture, another unsolved problem, and while she hadn't completed it, she'd made more progress than anyone in decades. This is my current work, she said as she wrote. Incomplete, but promising. I'm sharing it freely here with everyone. Because mathematics isn't about ownership. It's about understanding. It's about beauty. It's about truth. The mathematics that flowed from her hand was even more elegant than the Hildebrandt proof, more radical in its approach. She heard gasps from the audience as they recognized what she was attempting. This is impossible, someone whispered. So was Hildebrandt, Elena replied, still writing. Impossible is just another word for not yet understood. She worked for 20 minutes, filling board after board with mathematics that would be photographed, analyzed, and debated for years to come. When she finally stopped setting down the chalk, the auditorium was silent again. I may not complete this proof, she said. Or I may solve it tomorrow while washing dishes or mopping floors. Because that's who I am, a mathematician who happens to clean, or a cleaner who happens to do mathematics. The labels don't matter. The work does. She looked directly at Harlan. You're welcome to try to build on what I've shared. Everyone is. That's how mathematics progresses. But you cannot steal what is freely given, and you cannot diminish what has already been proven. Harlan stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked out of the auditorium, his footsteps echoing in the silence. As the door closed behind him, Elena heard later, he would never publish another paper, never teach another class. His career had ended the moment he'd tried to claim her light as his own. The president of the IMU approached the podium. Ms. Rivers, Dr. Rivers, that was extraordinary. The committee would like to offer you the special lectureship for the remainder of the conference. Would you be willing to give additional presentations? Elena looked out at the audience, at the hungry faces eager to understand her methods, at the service workers in the back, who had risked their jobs to be here, at the whole beautiful, terrible, miraculous world of mathematics that had rejected her and embraced her and made her who she was. I'll do better than that, she said. I'll teach workshops, not just for registered attendees, but for anyone who wants to learn. The janitors, the security guards, the hotel staff. Mathematics belongs to everyone. The announcement caused an uproar, but Elena didn't care. She was already planning, already envisioning a different kind of mathematical education, one that didn't require pedigrees or credentials, just curiosity and determination. That evening, the workshops began in a converted hotel conference room. They had expected maybe a dozen people. Over 200 showed up, not just service workers, but professors, graduate students, even some of the most decorated mathematicians in the world, all eager to understand how she saw what others missed. Elena taught them about inversion, about reading the negative space of problems, about finding patterns in chaos. She used examples from everyday life, how folding laundry could teach topology, how the rhythm of mopping could reveal periodicity, how the optimization of cleaning routes was actually a complex problem in graph theory. Mathematics isn't separate from life, she told them. It is life. Every pattern, every structure, every moment of understanding, it's all mathematics. We just need to learn to see it. An elderly woman in a hotel uniform raised her hand. I never finished high school. Is it too late for me to understand this? Elena smiled, remembering her own mother asking if she'd amount to anything. It's never too late. Let me show you something. She drew a simple spiral on the board, then began adding numbers to it. Within minutes, she'd transformed it into a visualization of the Fibonacci sequence, then showed how it appeared in everything from sunflowers to galaxies. This pattern, she said, was discovered by a man calculating rabbit populations. Mathematics begins with wondering about the world. That's all. Just wondering. She taught until midnight, until her voice was hoarse and her hand ached from writing. But she couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, because in every face she saw her own reflection, the hunger for understanding that no amount of hardship could kill. Over the next 3 days, her workshops became the unofficial heart of the conference. Nobel laureates sat next to hotel maids, all learning together, all equal before the democracy of mathematical truth. She taught them her methods, but more importantly, she taught them to believe in their own ability to see, to understand, to contribute. On the final day, the Clay Mathematics Institute held its ceremony. Elena stood on stage as the $1 million check was presented, the flashbulbs creating a constellation of light. In her acceptance speech, she announced what she would do with the money. I'm establishing the Open Proof Foundation, she said. It will provide resources for anyone working on mathematical problems, regardless of their background or credentials. We'll have online platforms, physical spaces in libraries and community centers, mentorship programs connecting established mathematicians with hidden talents. Because I'm not unique, there are thousands of Elena Rivers out there cleaning your offices, serving your food, invisible but brilliant. We're going to find them. The announcement made headlines around the world. Janitor turned millionaire mathematician democratizes genius. But Elena wasn't reading the headlines. She was on a plane back to the States, her notebook open working on the twin prime conjecture, while flight attendants who recognized her from the news brought her extra coffee and whispered their congratulations. When she landed, Clara was waiting at the airport with a sign that read "Ghost Chalk" and a smile that could have powered the city. So, Clara said as they hugged, ready to change the world. I already did, Elena replied. Now I'm going to make sure others can too. They drove back through familiar streets that somehow looked different now. Not because they had changed, but because Elena's place in them had. She was no longer the invisible janitor, the forgotten genius, the ghost in the machine. She was Elena Rivers' mathematician teacher proof that brilliance could bloom in the most unexpected places. As they passed Brylock University, Elena saw they had already put up a banner home of Elena Rivers' solver of the Hildebrandt Conjecture. She laughed, remembering how they had wanted to bar her from the building just 2 months ago. Want to stop by? Clara asked. Morrison has your old notebooks, the ones you left when you dropped out. Thought you might want them. Elena considered, then shook her head. Those belong to a different person. I'm not her anymore. Who are you now? Elena thought about it as they drove toward her apartment, toward the future she was building equation by equation. I'm someone who knows that the most beautiful mathematics often comes from the ugliest struggles. I'm someone who believes genius isn't rare, it's just rarely recognized. I'm someone who cleans boards and fills them with equal joy. That's a long answer. Mathematics teaches patience, Elena said, smiling. Besides, the best proofs are never simple. They're elegant. There's a difference. As they pulled up to her building, Elena saw a crowd gathered outside. Not reporters this time, but students, workers, people with notebooks and questions and hope in their eyes. They had come to learn from the janitor, who had solved the impossible problem. Elena got out of the car, picked up a piece of chalk from her pocket, she always carried one now, and began to teach right there on the sidewalk, using the building's brick wall as a board. Within minutes, she had them seeing patterns in the architecture, rhythms in the traffic, mathematics in every breath they took. "See?" she said to a young girl who reminded her of herself at that age, all potential and hunger. "It's everywhere. You just have to learn to look." The girl nodded, eyes bright with understanding, and Elena knew that another invisible mathematician had just become visible, another ghost had found its chalk. The work would continue. The problems would grow more complex. The resistance from those who preferred their genius rare and pedigreed would persist. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was this moment, this proof, this truth that no amount of erasure could destroy that brilliance belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. Elena Rivers had claimed hers. Now it was time to help others claim theirs. The first attempt to steal her legacy came exactly 3 months after Geneva disguised as generosity. Elena was in the back room of Mel's diner teaching her Tuesday evening class to a group that had grown from 5 to 37 people when the lawyers arrived. They wore suits that cost more than most of her students made in a month, carrying briefcases that gleamed with menace. "Ms. Rivers," the lead attorney said, his smile sharp as broken glass, "we represent the Harlan Mathematical Foundation. We're here to make you an offer." Elena didn't stop writing on the portable whiteboard she'd bought with her first Clay Institute payment. "Professor Harlan doesn't have a foundation. He does now. Established with considerable backing from alumni who believe his contributions to your proof have been undervalued." The lawyer opened his briefcase, revealing documents thick as a dictionary. "We're prepared to offer you $5 million for shared credit on the Hildebrandt proof. Your name would remain first, but Professor Harlan would be acknowledged as co-developer of the theoretical framework." Katie, sitting in the front row with her GED math book, snorted. "That's bullshit." The lawyer's smile tightened. "Young lady, this is a private conversation." "Nothing in my classroom is private," Elena said, finally turning to face him. "Everyone here knows the truth. They've seen the security footage, the documentation, the proof that Harlan contributed nothing but obstacles." "The court of public opinion is not a court of law," the second lawyer said. "We have 17 affidavits from professors stating they heard Harlan discussing these approaches years ago. We have documents that suggest forged." Sarah Winters said from the doorway, having arrived just in time. Elena's lawyer looked like an avenging angel in her black suit, her presence immediately shifting the room's power dynamic. "Every single one of those affidavits comes from professors who owe their positions to Harlan's recommendations. And those documents, I've had 3 handwriting experts examine them. Would you like to see their reports?" The lead attorney's composure cracked slightly. "Ms. Winters, surely we can discuss this professionally." "We are. Professionally, you're attempting to extort my client. Professionally, you're perpetrating fraud. And professionally—" Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping to something dangerous. "If you don't leave right now, I'll have you disbarred by morning." They left, but Elena knew they'd be back in different forms with different strategies. Men like Harlan didn't accept defeat. They just repositioned themselves for the next attack. "He's never going to stop," she said to Sarah after the lawyers were gone. "No," Sarah agreed. "But neither are we. And we have something he doesn't, the truth, and an army of people willing to defend it." She gestured to the classroom full of students, all of whom had pulled out phones to record the interaction, already posting it to social media with hashtags like @GhostChalkTruth and #mathematicsforall. Elena returned to her lesson, but her mind was already working on a different problem. The Open Proof Foundation was taking shape, but she needed something more, something that would make it impossible for the Harlans of the world to gatekeep mathematics ever again. The idea came to her at 3 in the morning, waking her from a dream about spirals and infinite sequences. She grabbed her notebook, writing in the dark, her hand knowing exactly where the lines were after years of practice. The Open Proof Collective wouldn't just be a foundation, it would be a new model for mathematical research entirely. No hierarchy, no credentials required, just pure mathematical merit. Any proof submitted would be evaluated blindly by at least 20 mathematicians from around the world, their identities hidden from each other. If validated, the proof would be published immediately, freely available to everyone, with full credit to the author, regardless of their background. She spent the next week building the framework, reaching out to mathematicians she'd met in Geneva, who had expressed support for her vision. To her surprise, many of the most established names in mathematics wanted to participate. "I'm tired of the politics," one Fields Medal winner told her over video call. "I just want to do mathematics. Your system removes everything except what matters, the work itself." Within a month, the platform was live. Within 2 months, it had received over 3,000 submissions from 47 countries. A taxi driver in Mumbai solved a problem in number theory that had stumped professors for decades. A teenager in Nigeria developed a new approach to cryptography that made tech companies scramble to hire her. A retired nurse in Detroit, who had been doing mathematics in secret for 30 years, submitted a proof that revolutionized graph theory. Each success was a vindication of Elena's belief genius was everywhere, waiting to be recognized. But success brought new challenges. The traditional academic establishment, threatened by this democratization, began a campaign to discredit the collective. They called it amateur hour, a degradation of standards, a dangerous experiment that would destroy mathematical rigor. The attacks reached a crescendo when the American Mathematical Society scheduled an emergency session at their annual conference titled "Maintaining Excellence in Mathematical Research: The Danger of Open Access Systems." Elena watched the live stream from her apartment, surrounded by her students from the diner. The panel was 5 older professors, all white, all male, all from Ivy League institutions. They spent an hour discussing the importance of proper training and institutional oversight, without once mentioning the breakthroughs the collective had already produced. "This is such garbage," Katie said now, halfway through her first year of community college, her mathematical confidence growing with each of Elena's lessons. "They're just scared." "Of course they're scared," Elena replied. "We're proving they're not special, that their expensive degrees and exclusive clubs aren't necessary for mathematical discovery." Then something unexpected happened. During the Q&A, a young voice spoke from the audience. "I'd like to respond to the panel's concerns." The camera swung to show a girl who couldn't have been more than 15, wearing a t-shirt with the ghost chalk spiral that had become the collective's unofficial symbol. "My name is Amara Washington. 6 months ago, I was failing high school math. Then I found Elena Rivers' online lectures. Now I'm working on a proof that Dr. Michael's there." She pointed to one of the panelists called "Impossible for Anyone Without a PhD." She walked to the stage uninvited, picked up a marker, and began writing on the whiteboard. The mathematics that flowed from her hand was sophisticated, elegant building on Elena's approach, but taking it in new directions. The auditorium fell silent as she worked, her confidence growing with each line. "This is my proof of the Gaussian correlation conjecture," she said when she finished. "I developed it in my bedroom using free resources from the Open Proof Collective, with mentorship from mathematicians I've never met in person, but who cared more about my ideas than my age or background." The panel sat frozen, unable to respond. The proof was clearly correct, even they could see that. "You talk about maintaining excellence," Amara continued, "but what you mean is maintaining exclusion. Elena Rivers showed us that mathematics belongs to everyone. You can't put that back in the box." The live stream chat exploded with support for Amara. Within hours, her proof was trending worldwide, and she became the youngest person ever to solve a major mathematical conjecture. Elena called her that evening. "That was brave what you did." "I learned from you," Amara replied. "You showed us we don't have to wait for permission to be brilliant." But the establishment wasn't done fighting. 2 weeks later, Elena received notice of a lawsuit. Not from Harlan this time, but from a consortium of universities claiming that the Open Proof Collective was violating intellectual property laws by allowing their students and faculty to publish outside traditional channels. "This is ridiculous," Sarah said, reviewing the filing. "They're essentially claiming they own any mathematics done by anyone associated with them." Can they win? Not legally, but they can tie us up in court for years, drain our resources, scare people away from participating. Elena felt the familiar weight of systemic opposition, the same forces that had kept her invisible for 16 years now, trying to invisibilize an entire movement. But this time she wasn't alone. Clara organized a response that surprised everyone. Within 48 hours, over 200 mathematics departments worldwide issued statements supporting the collective. The presidents of MIT, Stanford, and Cambridge jointly published an op-ed titled, "The Future of Mathematics is Open." More importantly, the students revolted. At Brylock University, where it had all started, graduate students went on strike, refusing to publish in traditional journals until the lawsuit was dropped. The strike spread to other universities like wildfire. Within a week, the consortium quietly withdrew the lawsuit, claiming it had been a misunderstanding. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. The International Mathematical Union announced that they were adopting the collective's blind review process for prize considerations. Going forward, all submissions for major mathematical prizes would be evaluated without knowing the author's identity, background, or institutional affiliation. "You've changed everything," Whitmore told Elena when he called with the news. "The old guard is furious, but they can't stop it now. The genie is out of the bottle." Elena was teaching her Thursday class when the announcement went public. Her students, now including 3 professors who came to learn her methods, 2 high school teachers redesigning their curricula, and a 73-year-old retiree who had just submitted his first proof to the collective, erupted in celebration. "We did it," Katie said, tears streaming down her face. "We actually did it." "No," Elena corrected. "We started it. The real work is just beginning." She was right. Over the next year, the collective grew exponentially. Physical locations opened in libraries, community centers, even some prisons. The online platform evolved to include teaching modules, collaboration spaces, and mentorship programs. Mathematics education began to transform, moving away from rote memorization toward pattern recognition and creative problem-solving. Elena traveled constantly now, but not to conferences in fancy hotels. She went to community colleges in forgotten towns, inner-city schools that had given up on advanced mathematics, rural areas where the nearest university was hundreds of miles away. She taught in homeless shelters and refugee camps in languages she didn't speak, but with mathematics that needed no translation. In Bangladesh, she found a girl solving topology problems in the dirt with a stick. In Peru, she met a silver miner who had developed new algorithms during his lunch breaks. In Greece, a refugee from Syria showed her an approach to prime numbers that made her reconstruct everything she thought she knew. Each discovery reinforced her belief genius wasn't rare, opportunity was. But the most meaningful moment came on an ordinary Tuesday, almost 2 years after Geneva. Elena was back at Mel's Diner having coffee with Katie, who was now studying at MIT on a full scholarship she'd earned through the collective. "I got in," Katie said, showing Elena an acceptance letter. "The PhD program. They said my work on extending your approach to the twin prime conjecture was groundbreaking. Elena felt tears threaten. This girl who had been struggling with basic algebra 2 years ago was now pushing the boundaries of mathematical knowledge. I couldn't have done it without you, Katie continued. Yes, you could have. You just needed someone to show you it was possible. The diner door chimed and Marcus walked in, his security guard uniform replaced with a suit. He'd been hired to head security for the collective's new headquarters, a building donated by a tech billionaire who'd been inspired by Elena's story. Thought I'd find you here, he said, sliding into the booth. There's something you need to see. He pulled out his phone, showing them a news article. Professor Victor Harlan had been arrested for academic fraud spanning 3 decades. The investigation, triggered by Elena's revelations, had uncovered a pattern of theft from students and colleagues that shocked even his critics. He's looking at serious jail time, Marcus said. Turns out stealing ideas is actually illegal when you do it systematically for profit. Elena felt no satisfaction, only sadness. All that brilliance wasted on protecting his ego instead of advancing mathematics. Speaking of advancing mathematics, Clara said, appearing as if summoned. Have you seen what Amara just posted? She showed them a proof on the collective's platform, a complete solution to the twin prime conjecture building on Elena's work, but taking it in directions she'd never imagined. The author credit read, Amara Washington, age 17, Detroit, Michigan, mentored by the ghost chalk herself. Elena stared at the proof, seeing in its elegant lines the future of mathematics, open, democratic, brilliant beyond measure. This teenager had solved one of the remaining millennium problems, and she'd done it from her bedroom using free resources, proving once and for all that genius recognized no boundaries. She'll get the $1 million, Clara said. The youngest person ever to win a Clay Prize. She's donating it to the collective, Katie added, having already seen Amara's announcement online. Says she wants to make sure other kids like her have the same opportunities. Elena stood overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd built. 2 years ago, she'd been invisible, cleaning these very floors, her genius trapped behind circumstance and prejudice. Now thousands of hidden mathematicians were emerging from shadows she knew too well, their brilliance finally given space to shine. I need some air, she said, stepping outside. The evening was warm summer, settling over the city like a comfortable equation. She could see the collective's headquarters from here, its windows glowing with the light of night sessions, people who worked day jobs coming to chase mathematical dreams after dark. A young man approached, hesitant. Excuse me, are you Elena Rivers? She nodded, expecting another request for a selfie or autograph. Instead, he pulled out a worn notebook. I'm a janitor at the local high school, he said. I've been working on something, but I don't know if it's worth anything. Could you look? Elena took the notebook, opening it to pages covered in familiar cramped handwriting. Mathematics, squeezed into margins and wrapped around coffee stains. She saw immediately what he had: a new approach to the Collat's conjecture, incomplete but promising. What's your name? She asked. David Chen. Well, David, this is definitely worth something. Have you submitted it to the collective? I was scared it wasn't good enough. Elena handed back the notebook. It's good enough. Trust me, I know what not good enough feels like, and this isn't it. This is the beginning of something beautiful. His face lit up, and Elena saw herself in his expression, the hunger for validation, the fear of rejection, the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, their mind mattered. Submit it, she said. Tonight. Don't wait for permission to be brilliant. As he walked away, clutching his notebook like a treasure, Elena heard her mother's voice from all those years ago. Will you amount to anything? She looked at the collective building, at the diner where she'd poured coffee, while solving impossible problems at the university where she'd been invisible for so long. She thought about Amara in Detroit, Katie at MIT, David with his notebook, and thousands of others around the world who were just beginning to believe in their own brilliance. "Yes, Mom," she whispered to the evening sky. "I amounted to something. But more importantly, I made sure others could too." Her phone buzzed another message from someone who'd found the courage to share their mathematics, another proof that genius lived everywhere, another validation that the ivory tower's monopoly on brilliance was finally irreversibly broken. Elena Rivers had been the ghost in the chalk, the janitor who solved the impossible. But that was just the beginning. Now she was something more, a door holder, keeping it open for everyone who'd been told they didn't belong in the palace of mathematical beauty. The next morning brought news that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago. The Wolf Prize Committee announced that Elena would receive their Lifetime Achievement Award, not just for solving the Hildebrandt Conjecture, but for revolutionizing how mathematics is discovered, shared, and celebrated worldwide. She accepted the award via video link broadcasting from a community center in South Chicago, where she was teaching a group of former gang members who'd discovered mathematics in prison. Behind her, they worked on problems that would have challenged graduate students, their focus, absolute, their potential, finally unleashed. "This prize doesn't belong to me," Elena said to the camera, to the distinguished committee, to the world watching. "It belongs to every person who was told their mind didn't matter because of where they came from or what they did to survive. It belongs to the janitors and waitresses, the prisoners and refugees, the teenagers and retirees who carry genius in notebooks no one ever asks to see." She turned the camera to show her students these men society had written off, now writing mathematics that would contribute to human knowledge. "We are not anomalies," she continued. "We are not exceptions that prove the rule. We are proof that the rule is wrong. Genius isn't rare, recognition is. Brilliance isn't confined to ivory towers. It lives everywhere, waiting for someone to say, 'Show me what you see.'" The committee chairman, a man who'd spent his career in the most exclusive institutions, cleared his throat with emotion. "Ms. Rivers, what you've built, it's the future we should have been working toward all along." After the ceremony, Elena sat with her students as they continued working. One of them, a man named Jerome, who'd spent 15 years in prison, looked up from his proof. "Ms. R., do you ever regret those 16 years when you were invisible?" Elena considered the question, thinking about all the nights she'd cried into her pillow, all the times she'd almost given up, all the moments when being invisible had felt like being erased. "No," she said finally. "Those years taught me to see in the dark, and now I can teach others to do the same." Jerome nodded and returned to his work, his pencil moving across the page with increasing confidence. Around him, others worked with similar intensity, their minds finally free to explore territories that had been forbidden to them not by law, but by circumstance. Elena's phone lit up with a message from Amara. "Just submitted another proof. This one's about quantum mathematics. Thank you for showing me I could." Then Katie. "My advisor says my doctoral thesis is revolutionary. I learned the word from you." Then David Chen, the collective accepted my proof I'm not just a janitor anymore. "Yes, you are," Elena texted back. "You're a janitor and a mathematician. Both have value. Both matter." She looked around the room at her students. These men finding redemption in mathematics, discovering that their minds could create beauty despite everything they'd destroyed. This was her true breakthrough, not solving the Hildebrandt Conjecture, but proving that brilliance could bloom in any soil, even that watered with tears and neglect. As the afternoon sun slanted through windows that needed cleaning, Elena picked up her chalk. She always carried it now, that piece Marcus had given her, worn down to a stub, but still precious, and began a new lesson. Not about fame or prizes or vindication, but about the simple joy of seeing patterns, where others saw chaos, of finding truth in a world full of lies, of discovering that you matter not because of what you do for money, but because of what your mind can create. The ghost chalk had become real, solid, undeniable, and it would never be erased again. That evening, as Elena packed up to leave, Jerome approached with his notebook. "I think I solved it," he said quietly. "The problem you gave us about infinite series. But it can't be right. It's too simple." Elena looked at his work, her breath catching. He hadn't just solved the problem, he'd found an approach that could revolutionize how they understood convergence. "Jerome," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is brilliant. Genuinely, absolutely brilliant." He stared at her, this man who'd been told he was worthless for so long. He'd believed it. "Really? Really? Submit it to the collective tonight. Use your full name. Be proud." As she walked to her car, Elena saw him through the window, typing carefully on the community center's old computer, submitting his first mathematical proof to the world. Tomorrow, reviewers would confirm what she already knew. Jerome Washington, ex-convict and mathematical genius, had just advanced human knowledge. The parking lot was empty except for her battered Honda, now bearing a bumper sticker someone had made, "Honk if you're hiding genius." She'd kept the car despite being able to afford better, a reminder of where she'd come from and why she did this work. As she drove home through streets she'd traveled for years, Elena thought about the next day's schedule. Morning workshop at the women's shelter. Afternoon session at the youth detention center. Evening class at the diner, still her favorite, where it all began. Each location held hidden mathematicians, people whose brilliance had been buried under poverty, trauma, and systemic neglect. But no longer. The Open Proof Collective now had over 1 million members worldwide, had published 3,000 proofs, had produced 17 major conjecture solutions from people who would never have been heard in the old system. The headquarters building came into view, its LED sign displaying a rotating selection of recently verified proofs with their authors' names and locations. Maria Santos, hospital cleaner, Sao Paulo, solution to the modified Kepler problem. Leeway factory worker, Shenzhen, new approach to elliptic curves. Robert Brown, homeless, Seattle, breakthrough in combinatorial theory. Each name was a victory, each proof a revolution. Elena's phone rang as she parked. It was Whitmore from the Clay Institute. "Elena, I have news. The IMU wants to create a new Fields Medal category, the open fields specifically for mathematicians without traditional academic backgrounds. They want you to chair the selection committee." She laughed, really laughed at the beautiful irony. "Tell them yes, but with conditions. The committee itself must be at least half non-academics, and the ceremony rotates, university 1 year, community center the next." "They'll resist." "Then they don't really want change, do they?" After a pause, Whitmore chuckled. "You've become quite the revolutionary, Ms. Rivers." "No," Elena corrected, looking at the lights beginning to twinkle across the city, each one potentially hiding someone solving impossible problems in impossible circumstances. "I've become visible, and I'm making sure everyone else can be too." She entered her apartment, now filled with letters from hidden mathematicians worldwide, their stories of discovery and vindication, papering her walls like the most beautiful proof. At her desk, her notebook lay open to a new problem, not one of the famous conjectures, but something she'd noticed while teaching Jerome, a pattern that might unlock new understanding of infinite series. Elena picked up her pencil, the same kind she'd used all those years ago when mathematics was her secret companion. and began to write. Outside, the city hummed with life, with struggle, with hidden genius waiting to be discovered. The ghost chalk had started a revolution that could never be stopped. Mathematics, true mathematics, belonged to everyone now. And in community centers and prisons and hospitals and homeless shelters, in every place where brilliant minds had been told they didn't belong, chalk was meeting board, pencil was meeting paper, and impossible problems were being solved by impossible people. The proof was complete, but the theorem was still being written. And Elena Rivers' Janitor, turned revolutionary, would make sure everyone got to contribute to its beautiful, infinite solution.